Welcome to the Project Zion podcast. This podcast explores the unique spiritual and theological gifts Community of Christ offers for today's world.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Project Zion podcast. This is Brittany Mangelson, and I'm going to be your host for today. We are going to do one of my favorite interviews to do, part of the series Chai Can't Even, which is where we talk to young adults, millennials, however you want to define it, in Community of Christ. So the reason why I really like these episodes is because I did not grow up in Community of Christ. And so I always like to hear how people experience the church who are kind of in my same age range. And it's just really interesting to see the different perspectives. We've interviewed people from all over the place, and it's just really interesting. So today we've got on Meghan and Jayson Gray, who are from Blue Springs, Missouri. So usually these episodes that I do have just been with one person, but I decided to get both of them on today, and I'm really excited. I met Meghan and Jason at World Conference. Nope, not last year, in 2019. We're now in 2021. So yeah. I guess it was a little while ago. And we're just going to talk about their experience growing up in Community of Christ and all that and what they're looking forward to in the future. So Meghan and Jason, welcome to Project Zion. Why don't you two introduce yourselves a little bit?
Yeah, thanks. We're glad to be here. So I'm Meghan, and I am a high priest in Community of Christ. I am serving on my congregation's pastorate team and have done that in prior years for quite a number of years. I work at the Art Museum in Kansas City. It's the Nelson Atkins Museum of Art. My title is Curatorial Associate in European Paintings and Sculpture, and I manage the museum's first digital catalog, and it's going to be all 106 French paintings and pastels dating from 1600 to 1945. So that's what I do in my work life.
And I'm Jason, Meghan's husband. I am an elder in Community of Christ. I currently don't have any leadership positions in our congregation, but I did serve for a few years as our congregational financial officer. During the day, I'm a project manager at an advertising agency here in Kansas City called VML Y&R. And in the evenings, I'm a leader in our son's Cub Scout pack. So I've been doing that for several years, and I really enjoy it, as I was a scout myself as a kid.
Yeah, so as Jason alluded to, we do have a son. He's 11. His name is Andrew, and we just got a dog a few months ago, which is a big deal. So, yay, we have a nice little family here in Blue Springs.
COVID pet.
Yes, pandemic puppy.
Yes. Oh, excellent. Well, like I said, I'm really excited to have you guys on today and just learn a little bit more about you. So let's get started. I think I know the answer to this, but did you both grow up Community of Christ? And what was that like? Did you attend camps? Just how was it I guess I'm making the assumption now, but how was it to grow up in Community of Christ? And if you didn't, what was your conversion story like?
You are correct. You are accurate. We did both grow up in the church. Back then it was the RLDS church, but I was born and raised in the church. My parents, both parents, all four of my grandparents were church members. My grandpa on my mom's side was actually a bishop and an appointee ministry for a number of years. So he, along with my grandma, they traveled around with the church, but also both worked at the auditorium in Independence for a while. So, that was a fun memory for me as a little kid. I remember going to the auditorium, trying to find my grandma's office up on the fifth floor, I think it was, which, that building is just a maze of ramps and rooms. And so getting lost in there, but I was always around the church from a very early age. Interestingly, now that all four of my grandparents have passed away, in my immediate family, I am now the only one still a member of the church. So both of my parents have since left the church and so has my younger sister and younger brother.
Yeah, I also grew up in the church, and both sides of my family are church members. My mom, Sue Sloan, is the World Church Secretary, and my dad, Jared Sloan, just retired in 2020, right before all of the pandemic hit. He was the Central Mission Center president, and even my great grandparents moved to Independence from Connecticut in the 1940s because they were gathering to the center place. I have fond memories of the temple being built, and I had, I was a kid at the time, and I had a little journal that I kept, and I journaled about what the temple would mean to me, and I would count we would have candles that we would in our windows as we hoped and prayed for the temple to be built. So I would count those candles that I would see, and was very excited because my mom's new office was going to be in the temple, and that was a really big deal to me. I think to a lot of us at the time, it was a big deal. And I had my first job at the campus swimming pool. So the mission center there, the local jurisdiction in town had a swimming pool, and now that's gone. But
some sports fields, baseball fields and stuff.
Yeah, various things. So I worked at the pool. So, very ingrained in church all through my life.
Yeah. And Brittany, you asked about camps. Both of us, I think camps were a big part of growing up in the church. I can remember going to reunion, family camp with my family growing up. We went to Camp Doniphan up in Excelsior Springs, Missouri, and went there for congregational retreats in the winter. And then as I got older, went to junior camp, went to the International Youth Forum when I was in high school, and a couple years down at up at Spectacular at Graceland. But interestingly for me, I didn't ever attend senior high camp. And that was because I spent all of those summers as a counselor at our local Boy Scout camp. So I was off doing that for 65 days all summer long. And that didn't leave any time to go to senior high camp because I took the one little bit of vacation I had to go to Spectacular every year.
Yeah, I attended all those same camps. I did attend senior high camp and junior high camp, and Jason and I actually became better friends at Spec. We kind of knew each other a little bit, but we were on the same soccer team at Spec and became good friends. And then, later that same year, I invited him to my 16th birthday party. So we've known each other a long time.
I love this.
This is where we say, and the rest is history, right?
Yeah, exactly. And we're done. You can just let your imagination run wild. I love it. I absolutely love it. So I'm a little curious, and this is, again, something that I'm always curious about because I didn't grow up in Community of Christ. And now that my kids are growing up in Community of Christ, it's just always interesting, the opportunities for ministry that have been provided to them. Granted, we are now in the COVID world, so things look a little different, but I'm wondering how you were treated as a kid in your congregations, how you were mentored. Were you given opportunities to serve or to figure out what you wanted to do, how you wanted to be engaged in your community? Or did you feel like a burden? Because I do know, some congregations aren't overly prepared for kids. I'm just curious to know, what your experience was.
Yeah, I think I had lots of opportunities growing up to, be up front and say prayers, participate in things. I had some wonderful youth ministers and people that helped mentor me. But I think I also, I had some times more as a preteen, teen, and then later as a young adult where I felt kind of left out, or sometimes I felt sort of steamrolled, like, I don't really care what you have to say. We're just going to keep doing it the way, this other person wants. So, it's not always rosy and perfect. But the good thing about living in the Independence area is that if you feel really hurt by something, by someone or a certain place, you can go and find your niche somewhere else. So that is a good thing. But I think I also had sort of a I had a different experience than Jason did, in that because my dad worked for the mission center his whole career and my whole life, he was assigned to be pastor of several different congregations in the area. So I went to 4 different congregations as I was growing up, and, met lots of different people and lots of different friends, and saw how things were done a little bit differently in different places. So that was beneficial.
That wasn't all at the same time, though. So not pastor at 4 congregations simultaneously.
No, thankfully not.
over a span of several years, he moved from one to the other. So, yeah. I, on the other hand, I attended the same congregation my whole childhood. It was actually the same congregation that my grandparents went to, which is why my family attended that congregation. So I attended there until I went off to college. But my family was really active in our congregation. Every Sunday morning we were at church, and my dad was a deacon, my mom was a teacher, and we had a really great, really vibrant congregation, great youth ministry program. Like Megan, I don't remember ever feeling like I couldn't do anything. And maybe that was because my dad was a deacon and we were there at all times of the day, and so kind of feeling like I had the run of the building. But in terms of mentors, there's not any one person that sticks out in my mind as a mentor. I mean, there's a lot of great people that I can remember providing great ministry that I kind of try to emulate now, maybe. But one time that sticks out in my mind was an older gentleman. I think he was an appointee minister, or had been. He took me and one of the other guys aside, and this was when I was maybe early teens. And he said, I can't remember the exact words, but it was basically to the effect of, I think you guys are going to be great leaders someday. And I really see a lot of potential, and really see that you're going to, do great things in this church in the future. And that kind of always really stuck with me, not as a pressure, but just, I don't know, stuck with me. And helping my dad a lot, I think, really showed me what it was like to be a deacon. And I learned how to be attentive to the needs and the things that were going on around me. Whether it be running around with a microphone while people were given, testimonies during services or at reunion. But interestingly enough, I actually never was a deacon. I was never ordained a deacon. My first priesthood office was a priest, and then later got ordained as an elder. I think some of that may have happened just because, I graduated high school, I went off to college and got kind of disconnected from my local congregation. And so when I then came back after college, we got married, we started going to a different congregation. And so I just kind of skipped over that phase, I guess. But yeah.
That actually brings me to the next question. I'm just curious about how you were engaged or disengaged in the church when you were in college. I mean, did you go to Graceland? Did you have a pressure to maybe, find a congregation while you were in college, or only date members of the church? Just kind of, what did I'd like this little nope head shake. Because again, it's just so different from my experience growing up. But yeah.
Yeah, anyway. Sure. So I can remember as a senior in high school, I started looking at colleges, and I actually went around and visited a couple different colleges. And the places I went to visit were because I had friends from church that were attending those colleges. And so that's why I went, and I went and visited them and visited the school. Interestingly, Graceland wasn't on that list. And looking back on it, I don't know why, but I ended up at Central Missouri State University, kind of in the middle of Missouri, which part of the reason I think was because my grandparents lived there a block from campus. But it was a good school. I knew people that were there. And Community of Christ had a strong presence there, both in town, but also there was a really strong campus ministry called Lillenas Student Fellowship. And that was my primary connection with the church during college. There were times where I or some of us would attend the Sunday services at the local congregation there in town. And the congregation did a lot to support the students who were part of Lillenas. They had an adoptive grandparent program. So people, unlike me, who actually had grandparents there, but all the other community members, different people in the congregation would adopt them as their kind of grandkids and have them over for dinner and just kind of create some relationships there. So there was a great dynamic between the local congregation and our campus ministry. But that was my main connection to the church during college.
Yeah. So, and I also ended up at, now it's called the University of Central Missouri in Warrensburg. And I went there because they had the major that I wanted to study. And unfortunately, Graceland didn't, because I did consider Graceland. And I remember that I showed up on campus to, just to take a tour of campus. And there was Jason. And he was actually, I think you were my tour guide that at least one time. So, I kept running into him, and he happened to live kind of close by in one of the dorm rooms. And so every Tuesday, I think it was, he would show up at my dorm room and say, "Hey, you ready to go to Lillenas? Let's go to Lillenas." So, I went a couple of times, and it's, for me, I'm not like a super outgoing person. So it's kind of hard sometimes to find your place in a new group of people. So it was a little uncomfortable at first. I wasn't sure I really wanted to go, but he kept coming to my door every week. "You ready? Let's go to Lillenas. Come on, let's go to Lillenas." So I started to go, and then Lillenas decided they were going to have this big Christmas program, and they were going to raise money for a charity. So part of this program, they were going to dance in the church, which was, big deal. Yeah. So we were going to do a swing dancing number, and we happened to just get paired up. And then from there, it was like, oh, maybe there's a little interest here between the two of us. Maybe there's something more. So, at that point, then we started dating and eventually got engaged. And so I think, Lillenas not only kept me connected to the church, but helped me find my husband. Yeah. But I mean, I have to say too, that Lillenas had a huge impact on my my spiritual life and on my my self-confidence in what I could do as a leader, and also expanding my thoughts, my theological thoughts. Not that everybody always agreed with the way I thought about things, but it was great to be able to talk about it with other people and know that nobody's going to, get mad at you and kick you out or something. So yeah, Lillenas was really very influential and very important, I think, for both of us.
Yeah. So, Jason, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here. Did you keep inviting Meghan because you were hoping to, grow that relationship, or were you just really excited about Lillenas and wanted to hang out with the Community of Christ member?
The way Meghan tells the story, you might think it was that I was interested in her. But I mean, she would tell you I was a bit of a big flirt back then. And so, no, I was just friendly, and it was somebody that I knew from back home. And it was more like you said, I was a big fan of Lillenas. And so I'm an extrovert. So for me, it's like, hey, the more people I can bring to the party, like the more fun it is for me. So, it was all about that. She was actually dating some other guy at the time, but it was really then once we got paired up for that dancing number, the sparks kind of happened from there. So.
That's great. I am glad it all worked out.
I was just being a minister, witnessing and inviting. I had no ulterior motive, Brittany.
Yeah, just being invitational. It's great. So Another thing that I'm always curious about, because you can be so involved in your congregation as a youth and as a young adult, and like you said, you both were involved with the Liahona program, campus ministries. I'm just wondering if those skills kind of came in handy as you were going through school or starting your career. Do you think that you maybe had a head start with any leadership skills or community building skills just because of your experiences in the church?
Yeah, I'll go all the way back to high school, actually, and say I think that's where I started realizing that I could be a leader and started doing some of the leadership skills that I then kind of continue to build on throughout college. So in high school, they were stakes back then. We had a stake-wide youth ministry called Harbor Nights that met in Independence at one of the congregations. And so, it was once a week, all the different congregations came together. That started with praise music, and then they broke into small groups. And each one of those groups were led by older youth. And so I got to be one of those leaders and lead one of those groups. And so that was really one of the first times I remember, being a leader, and specifically a leader in a church setting. We had separate planning meetings where we had to, learn about the scriptures for that week and work through the material and prepare kind of how we were going to take our group through the discussion. And I think, as anybody who's prepared a sermon can probably relate to, when you have to dig through the material, you really gain a deeper understanding of it when you then have to prepare it to share with somebody else. So that was the first really of several leadership roles. As I went into college and got involved in different organizations beyond Liahona, but throughout, campus, and then that continued after we got out of college. Meghan and I were fortunate enough to get invited to be part of a program for young adults that John Chapman was leading up called Emerging Leaders. And I would describe it almost as a mini seminary program where we met every couple of months. And one time Tony and Charmaine came in and led a session, but we had different guest speakers. And it was really about growing future leaders of the church. And so that was a great opportunity for us, but that really connected us with a lot of other young adults in the Mission Center. And we started organizing other young adult activities for our whole Mission Center as part of that. And so that was, I think all of those things kind of helped us not only grow as a leader, but also gave us the opportunities to be leaders.
Yeah. And I mean, not to go back to Liahona, because as I said, that was really influential to me. But I was really inspired by watching other student leaders. Sarah Dowell and Carrie Twombly had both been presidents of Liahona. And I think I decided pretty quickly that that's what I wanted to do. So, eventually, I can't remember if I only did it 1 year or 2 years, but that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to lead the group. So having that leadership experience there, we also would our program was to do a sort of chats session where you would, come up with some theological question or scripture or something, and you would, talk together as students. So leading some of that was great experience. And then I feel really blessed that I was called to priesthood right out of college. I actually got the call while I was in college. So I was ordained an elder when I was 21. And I think that can be hard for some kids that age, young adults that age, if you're not really plugged into a home congregation. And so even though I was primarily down at school doing my ministry, I guess, my pastor had enough faith in me or saw enough potential in me so that, he brought this call to me. So that was really amazing. I felt very humbled at that point. And so then, there was still that challenge. I think that a lot of students face of having to reintegrate with your congregation if you come back home, or perhaps finding a new place to worship. So, but I think they were fairly accepting of us. And I also tend to be the type of person that's like, I'd rather not just sit back and wait for something to happen. I'll volunteer to help make it happen. So, I started planning worships right away, and I haven't really ever stopped. That's kind of one of my things, is planning worships. And yeah, I think as Jason said, we've had a lot of different experiences in helping with youth groups or young adult ministries. We participated in something called Volume for a while. That was kind of a contemporary worship. We did, we had New Year's Eve parties, was kind of one of our things that we tried to do in our mission center. And so there was a lot of different things we were involved in. And then I was ordained a high priest in 2016 when I was 34. So that also was very humbling. But I love that this church allows young adults and youth and, really anybody to share their talents and their ministry, and to also be able to hold priesthood offices to bring ministry, and that we find the value in all persons. Well, that's really important. We've also been reunion directors for several years. We've served, Jason and I have both served on the pastorate. I've continued to do so for quite a long time. I've served on the health and wholeness team at the World Church level. I don't know, there's a lot of so many different ways that you can grow and use leadership skills.
So it sounds like you both have had a wide variety of different opportunities that have come your way. I think that is also one thing that I really like about Community of Christ, is there's so many different areas of ministry that you can kind of dip your toe in. And regardless of priesthood, office, or whether you're a disciple or whether you're a new member or a seasoned member, there's just so much that you can get involved in. And Meghan, I have to say that worship planning is one of my favorite things to do as well. And it's a lot of fun. And sometimes it's just always interesting, because as a worship planner, you can tell, like, kind of whether you've nailed the service or not, like whether it's going well or not. Mm-hmm. And it is one of those things that does bring some level of pretty instant gratification, just knowing that you kind of created this place where people can feel God's love and grow together as a community. So that's one of my favorite things.
Yeah, for sure.
So I'm pretty sure that you think that religious communities are important, that church is important. But I'd like to hear more of your thoughts on that. As you know, so many people in our generation have stepped away from church or have found themselves in this spiritual but not religious place. I'm a firm believer in community. I think that I'm a better person when I worship with other people, or when my theology is challenged, or I can collaborate with others. But I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that, in the value of religious community still in this day and age.
Well, I think so often I've recently noticed a lot that even though people may step away from the church, they tend to always turn back to it when they have major life events. So, if it's a wedding, you've got a new baby, maybe you want to have a baby blessing, or if someone passes away and you need a funeral, or even if it's not a funeral, but it's that community that can be there, that can help nurture you and bring you food if you're ill. Definitely the prayers. I think people always are turning back for prayer in major life situations. And I think the community of fellowship is so important. I think that community is definitely there at the heart of it all, that you still want that community to help you, if it's celebrating your major life events or just in your day-to-day life, the friendships that you have. And I think, as you said, Brittany, it's a great point that you can also be challenged in your theology and your religious thinking is great for personal growth.
Yeah, I would agree. For me, it's community. our group of friends and our church community are kind of intertwined in many ways. But it raises an interesting question, I think, as we're looking at what the future church looks like. One of the questions a few of us have talked about is, well, what's different between just getting together with a group of friends and having a community versus a church community and a faith community? And I think that's a real challenge to church today, is that people are finding that community in other places. My kid plays sports, and so I'm traveling on the weekends, and I'm building this community with other parents because their kids are playing sports as well. And more and more, Sunday's becoming less of a sacred time that there's sports games happening then. But for example, my sister, her and her husband, they have a gym and they go do CrossFit, and that is their community. That's their people that they connect with. It's their support group. And so they have found what we find in church, they're finding other places. And so I think that's one of the really relevant questions for us right now is, what can a church community bring that's unique that people can't find other places? And I think the flip side of that question, which our small group of friends have really wrestled with recently, is, so if there's 4 or 5 families that all happen to be church members, but we just like hanging out, and so we get together and play board games one night, right? Is that a church fellowship thing, or is that just friends getting together? And where are the lines between that? And particularly as we start to try and create space for non-church people or friends or parts of our family that we want to maybe bring back to church, can we invite them to those activities kind of as a gateway opportunity to get them back engaged with the faith community? But we've really struggled with that, of like, how do you transition it from, hey, come over for New Year's Eve to have a party and play games, to, hey, this group's now meeting on a weekly basis or a monthly basis, and that has some faith aspect to it. You don't want people to feel like it's a bait and switch. Wait, you invited me over to play board games, and now you're talking about prayer requests and scripture? Like, whoa. So I think that's something we're still struggling with. And that's a big question for me as we look at the future church. Where are those lines? And how do we connect with people where they are, right? Okay, you go to the gym and you do CrossFit. How does that have a faith aspect to it, maybe, and blend the two together? I don't know, but I think that sense of community is really relevant for today. But we have to figure out a way that people are finding it different and more than what they can find other places.
I'm asking myself those same questions, especially with ministry here in Utah, because people want community and they want to learn about community of Christ, but they also don't really want to be at the receiving end of quote unquote missionary work. And so it's really awkward, because I've just tried to, follow their lead. And if they ask questions, but then I still genuinely want to be people's friends. And even if they aren't interested in the church, it doesn't mean that the friendship has to end. So it's just kind of this awkward, it almost feels like dating sometimes back when we were dating, because it's like, when do you have that conversation to quote unquote move it to the next level, or like introduce these different things? And it's just maybe that's just because I'm socially awkward, but there's my confession for you all. It can be awkward.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. And I think for me, part of that challenge is, do we have fellowship activities and church related activities that aren't formal church that feel more accessible to those people?
Mm-hmm.
Like you're saying, what point do you bring your new boyfriend or girlfriend to Thanksgiving dinner, right? That's kind of taking it up a level, right? But if the family's just getting together and going to the movies, maybe they can tag along. So, that's a great kind of analogy, Brittany, of thinking
Kind of an
about it,
awkward one.
dating in a way of, yeah.
So I guess with all of this, I'm curious to know what keeps you engaged in Community of Christ. So it sounds like you have a core group of friends that maybe just so happen to be members of the church, but what keeps you going to your congregation? And again, we're in COVID, so answer that however you want, whatever going to your congregation looks like right now. But yeah, what keeps you engaged in the life of your congregation?
Well, it may be interesting at this point just to say that core group of friends that we have, they actually attend other congregations. So what's interesting is we get together with them and we can talk about church stuff and we can talk about what's going on in each of our congregations. But when it comes to Sunday morning formal worship, we're actually not with them. We're with a different group of people.
Yeah, I was going to say at our congregation level, probably one of the big things that keep us coming back every Sunday is that my grandparents go there and my parents go there, and it's like this family time that you get to see your family once a week. I love my congregation. I love the people in it, but that was one of the reasons why we chose to go to my home congregation when we got married, was because my family was there, and it really was a big draw. And it's nice when you have kids and then grandparents are there to help take care of the kids. It's really helpful. But I think on a much broader scale, I have always had a passion for Community of Christ. I think that probably part of it was at the time in my teens when I started to really have sort of a faith crisis, and I started to question some of this theology and some of these people in my congregation that would teach my Sunday school classes taking the Bible very literally, and it was really hard for me to square that all off with some other things I was learning, some of the experiences I was having. And I would come home regularly from Sunday school and talk to my parents and cry. Like it was like a regular weekly thing, gonna cry and work through what we've heard through Sunday school. It was really hard, but that was also coming right about the same time that the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints was going to change their name to Community of Christ. And I think also at that same moment, because we took on this new name, we stopped having to say what we weren't. And we started to move away from saying we're the one true church. And these sorts of things that felt really like boxed me in. So I think at this moment that they were starting to, explore that and kind of proclaim their identity, I was also trying to figure out, my theology and my identity in this religious community. And so I think we kind of were growing at the same time. And it was just such a beautiful, powerful thing to have, to attend conference and hear Grant McMurray and Steve Veazey talking about the church and saying these things like, the earth matters and ecology, and we have to take care of the earth. And, we need to be paying attention to our youth and our young adults. And of course, peace and justice and all of these just wonderful things that Community of Christ stands for, just spoke to me and just makes my heart sing. So I have a very big passion for Community of Christ at its core self.
I, on the other hand, to your question about what keeps us active and involved, for our local congregation, for me, it's just a habit, honestly. As bad as that may sound, as I grew up, we went to church every Sunday. Like, that's just what you did. And now we have a kid, and that's just what we do. And I guess I frame it that way because for me, that corporate worship on Sunday morning isn't a real powerful experience for me often. It's just kind of going through the motions. I get more out of the small group ministry and the times with our friends. So I think there's something different that I kind of am searching for. But I'm still connected to the larger church. Some of the more powerful times for me is, going to World Conference and sitting in the auditorium and singing some of these hymns that with hundreds and thousands of people from all over the world, like, and going, wow, this is powerful. Like, so I still have that strong connection to the denomination. I really connect with ideas of worth of all persons and sacredness of creation. So my connection and kind of what keeps me coming back are some of those larger principles and that feeling of, man, we're part of something bigger here.
Yeah, I want to say that World Conference is also one of those things that's it's so powerful to me too, especially when you all raise your voice in song together, and like Jason was saying, hundreds of thousands of voices all singing together to praise God. And I always love it when the Tahitians sing, and that's just, the music is very important, but especially being in that corporate worship together and seeing across cultures and continents, and it's just amazing.
No, I completely agree with everything both of you just said. I think that, I grew up going to church, and in a lot of ways, church has always been a habit for me. And it has been interesting because of COVID, our congregation, all congregations, most congregations, at least in the US, aren't meeting face to face like we are used to. And I have felt more of a loss in that than I expected, which might sound weird, but I miss it more than I thought that I would. And I think that maybe how long this has dragged on has aided in that. It's kind of interesting when I think back to the beginning of the pandemic and thinking, okay, this might go on, maybe for 3 months tops. And then here we are almost a year later, and there doesn't seem to be an end in sight. But yeah, it is interesting how we can feel connected on a local level and then on a world church level, which again, I relate to. I've been to the last 2 world conferences, and just seeing the worldwide church has been really, really important for me, because the church in Utah looks very different than the church looks in Missouri or in Tahiti or anywhere else.
Yeah.
So yeah, just recognizing that, here in Utah, we 100% are a religious minority. And then, rolling up into the temple parking lot for the first time and just kind of breathing a sigh of relief, because it's like, oh, these folks will actually understand me to some degree. It's a good feeling to feel like you're home with your people. So yeah, totally get that. So what would you say are some of the challenges being a millennial in Community of Christ, or being a young adult? And then I'm just kind of curious too, your thoughts on the church maybe adapting to the needs of younger families with little kids, changing technology, just things that maybe some of the older generations in the church haven't really been used to. Just what are your thoughts on all of that?
Well, I'm flattered to ask that question in that way, because I just turned 40 about 2 weeks ago, and Megan keeps reminding me how old now.
Because I'm younger.
Yeah, she's not there yet. But I think for me, if I had to boil it down to one thing, I would say it's about transitions. So transitioning from being a young adult to now just, I guess I'm just an adult. Like, so when you're in senior high, you have that identity, right? When you're a young adult, you have that identity. And then now that I'm not in that 18 to 35 category anymore, so I guess I'm just an adult. I think the other piece for me is, especially in our mission center, and I don't know if it's this way in other parts of the church, but youth programming is huge. So when you're in junior high and senior high, there is a lot of great programming that the Mission Center and the congregations put on. We do it really well, and we do it really big. But then when you become a young adult, I feel like a lot of that goes away. And so that transition can, I think, be hard on people because your people, your community is going to senior high camp in the summer, going to spectacular, and then all of a sudden you graduate high school and you can't do that anymore. So it feels like a void, I think. And then fortunately for us, when we went to college, we had a church community in Lillenas that we were able to connect with. So, that transition was a little bit easier, but I think about people that wouldn't have that. They may be the only Community of Christ person at their college. I can't imagine what that transition is like, because you're disconnected from your local home congregation that you grew up in. There may not be a nearby Community of Christ congregation. And then once you graduate college and you transition back to the real world, whether you're coming back to your home congregation or you're going somewhere new, like we did, we got married and I started going to a brand new congregation. So now you've got another transition. And so I think there's an opportunity for the church to make those transition points maybe easier and we make sure we don't lose the connection with people as they move through those different stages.
Yeah, I was thinking, about being a millennial and what might have been hard, that when we had a young child, Andrew's now 11, so don't feel quite this way anymore. But when he was really young, it was hard to go to church and feel like you could pay attention. Sometimes, especially when he was really little, there wasn't always something for him to go to. And so we would spend a lot of time in the back and trying to keep his attention so that he wasn't being too noisy. And, you didn't always get much out of coming to church. And that's hard. And I'm sure that's happening in other places. We're lucky as he's gotten older, he's always had really great Sunday school. There's always been youth ministers and people that want to work with the kids at our congregation. I know that that's not always the case at other places. They may not have enough kids to really devote to that time. But I think with COVID and having to go online, some of that has really been upended, at least for our congregation. And we have mostly focused just on the adult worships. And, Andrew will come with us to them, but he tends to not listen. Which I'm not sure that he listened that much when we were in person either, but there was always Sunday school or something else for him to go to. So we have been, and our congregation has been offering a junior church thing virtually later in the morning that he goes to. But my goodness, there sure aren't very many kids going, and they aren't coming to regular adult worship either. I just think that I don't know. I hope that they come back when we are in person again. So I think that has been really hard to keep those connections and to be creative on ways that we keep the kids involved and connected. I don't know. Our congregation has always done a special Christmas time event for kids. It's really supposed to be an outreach ministry, but our own children as well just really love it. And, it's kind of a ministry for the youth as well. But with COVID, we decided, we would try and do it online, and it worked pretty well. It was certainly a lot easier to put on, a lot less planning and a lot less people that had to be involved. That was really nice. And I think the kids enjoyed it, but even still, our reach just wasn't as broad as it usually is. So that's certainly a challenge right now.
Yeah, once again, I relate to everything that you both said. I think that it can be, I've seen the transition period for several people where it's like, oh, and I can tell that we're not doing enough to support them, but then what do we need to do? And I've heard from a lot of people in the church who have various degrees of activities or activity levels, that it seems to be those points of transition that's kind of either the make or break, and whether or not there's continued engagement, because there needs to be that relationship. There needs to be trust, I think, in our young adults and in, like you said, Jason, just regular adults that, even if we haven't been leading congregations for a while or leading worship or whatever, that there needs to be that trust. And I get the sense that in some mission centers and congregations, that trust might not be, I don't want to say that it's not there, but it might not be as readily available to kind of pass the torch on down and to let younger people step up in some of the programming and the formation of the community. And I think that during those transitions, if those aren't there, then maybe that's when people can more easily slip away. And then I definitely know what it's like to be a young parent with young kids. We found Community of Christ when my twins were 3, and oh my goodness, bless our congregation, because they put up with a lot. Oh, it's hard though. And it's so hard to feel, like you are getting anything out of it, because you pack everybody up, and then church can be a little bit of a disaster with young children. So
yeah,
it's hard. So we've talked about, some of the good things about Community of Christ, what keeps you both engaged, and then maybe some of the challenges. But what do you see as some of the biggest challenges collectively as a church as we move forward together?
I think we've talked about community. So I feel like we could say the word of the day for this episode is community. But focusing on fostering that community is super important. We've talked about that worldwide community. We're fortunate enough that we've been able to host a lot of different people as World Conference delegates over the years. And that's helped us connect with that worldwide community. We know Amson and Rashmi Malik in India. We're friends now with Chantal and Henning Mueller in Germany, Gina Colvin in New Zealand, right? You guys, whether it be within the US or around the world, we now have all these connections with so many people. And so I think as we think about like technology and as we think about the church moving forward, is how do we provide visibility and connectedness to that larger community?
Well, I know there's been a lot of conversation across the church recently, and I think there's been the whole terminology about, church 2.0 to church 3.0, with church 2.0 being what the current way that we're doing church. Well, maybe not on Zoom, but, the way we do worship and that sort of thing, to what might be the future church, what that might look like. I keep finding people that want to just perfect our old way of doing things. And they really think that, if we could just have better sermons, or we could have the organ play more often, or, if we had better PowerPoint, it would fix all our problems and people would start coming back to church. And, I think a lot of some people realize that that's not going to solve all the problems, and that people are moving away from organized religion. And I think what I would really love to see is that focus on Zion, but actually living it out. We preach and teach and sing about Zion, but we need to live, love, and create Zion. How do we create more authentic communities that don't just meet on Sunday mornings to talk about a better world, but actually go out and build that better world? I think that's the big challenge for us.
Well, and I got my degree in marketing, and so I think about it kind of through that lens. And the first step is, how do we catch people's eyes and attention and grab a piece of their time? We talked about, there's a lot of different things pulling at people's time and attention right now. So we've got to have something unique that draws them in that they can't find other places. I have really appreciated over the last several years how the church has gotten more clear on their identity, mission, and message, and distilled that down. We've had other young adult friends that they participated in Community of Christ, and then they went to the church down the street in another denomination. And again, the marketer in me says, "Oh man, we've failed to establish what our brand is as Community of Christ. If people think that they can just go down the street to a different congregation and different denomination and get the same thing." And I get it. Everybody has different things that they need and that they're searching for, but there's something really powerful to, our brand, that loving community and promoting joy, hope, love, and peace. There's something unique about that. And I think we need to make sure that that's clear and tangible for people that come in contact with our church, and they can see that it's different. And then once we get them connected to that, like Meghan said, we gotta meet them where they are and what their needs are. So providing relevant and meaningful experiences that may be more or may be different than just sitting in a pew, listening to their traditional worship service, once a week on Sunday mornings. How do we practice the radical hospitality? How do we give people opportunities to put their values into action and make a difference in the world?
I really appreciated how you both articulated that. And honestly, it reminded me of President Beasley's, the article in the Herald a little while ago, the metamorphosis, this idea that, we are becoming a new creation as a community, and it's going to be the same, but yet very different. And it's going to be the essence of who we are, and yet it's going to look different. And no one really knows what that is going to look like. And it's going to take structural changes. It's going to take a shift in expectations, things like that. And it's nerve-wracking, but also really exciting to be part of, at least from my perspective. And then I also am glad that you articulated, Jason, kind of this tension of seeing people who have been engaged in Community of Christ suddenly find themselves in a different faith community and maybe being a little puzzled by that. I have experienced that as well. And just knowing that, the church down the street or across the valley or wherever that these people that I know have ended up, just knowing that their theology, their values, their sense of mission is so different from what we are, that I've been left wondering, like, man, did we not get the message across? Because I don't actually think that their values line up with that church. And yet maybe their programming is stronger, or, their youth program is stronger. So that's why they're going there. But it just always feels like such a missed opportunity that maybe, I or we didn't do a good enough job maybe to share who we are. And I know that that's probably not what it is, but it can feel that way. So I hear you.
And I think part of that is, as a congregation, right? How are you connecting people to that larger mission and message that the world church is putting out, right? So, I mean, like I said, they've done a great job of kind of distilling a lot of that down, but then to get it disseminated out to all the congregations, and congregations to pick that up and really embrace it and to embody it, that's the big challenge. That's the delivery mechanism, right? And so, I know we have people in our congregation that don't go to Mission Center Conference, don't go to World Conference. They're not engaged at those larger levels, which, for us, living in the shadow of the temple, as some people say, like, it's kind of baffling to me. Like, you talked about how great of an experience it is coming to World Conference. Like when it's in your own backyard, like some people kind of take it for granted and they're missing out on that larger understanding and that larger connection that for me is a big part of Community of Christ and what attracts me and keeps me engaged in Community of Christ.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Really, really well said. So with all of this, how do you think that then we as adults can turn around and help the youth, help empower youth, so maybe they don't get stuck in those gaps of transition like we talked about, or that they can feel empowered to take on leadership roles and to find their own value in Community of Christ?
Yeah, I think empower is a great word. But I think there's some prerequisites before you can empower them. I think first you have to trust them. You used that word earlier, right? Do we trust our youth? Are we going to give them the opportunity to lead and try things? I mean, last summer, our congregation had a series of conversations around what does the future of church look like? And it's clear there are a lot of people that are afraid of change. And so, some of those conversations go to, well, our youth are the future of the church and this and that. And I kind of pause and go, man, let's look around. I think the young adults and the youth are the church now, right? That's the current church. And I think it's hard to, for some of us to step back and hand over the keys to that next generation and say, I'm going to trust you to take this somewhere and not where that is, or to try something new and different that might not work, or we've tried that before. I think the other part about it is just listening. Like, are we listening to what people want and need? And are we willing to accept that it might be different from what I want and need? And that's okay. And then how do we meet in the middle or do multiple things to meet those various needs?
Yeah. And I'm wondering too, are we even asking the youth what they want and what they need? Are we assuming that we know what they want and need, that they want, loud, vibrant, contemporary music? I mean, maybe, but there may be many more things or other things that they need instead.
Yeah, I think, we talked about some of the ministries we were involved in, during college and just out of college as young adults, and, praise bands and music was a big component of that. And I don't know if it's just evolved or, I'm finding now, like, there's a lot of hymns that I really love. It's not a praise band being up front, but there's some great hymns like, For Everyone Born. That is an awesome hymn. And so I think the other tendency sometimes is we put everybody in these boxes of, well, the younger generation wants praise bands and we need to do stuff like that, where, there's older folks that love that type of music as well. And on the flip side, there's younger people that love a good hymn, I think.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think it's interesting. I've done several of these interviews before, and I'm not sure anyone has really said, well, just ask the youth, what do they want? And I think that's really important, to assume that we know what they want in worship and activities and programming and how they are to be mentored, because I think that it's an interesting thing when we think about how you guys said that sometimes people just think if we just make the PowerPoint a little bit better, if we just perfect the hymns, or we do this or do this, and it's always within the box of what we've always done. If we mentor people in the same way that it's quote unquote always been done, are we really helping birth something new that will be something that the youth can easily transition to? So I feel like I'm processing what you said as you're saying it, and I'm a fan.
Well, it's interesting, just having this conversation, one thing that comes to my mind is we're actually watching a show on Disney Plus right now called Imagineering. Mm-hmm. And a core part of that is, how they create all these fancy new rides in the Disney parks, but they're always working outside of the box. Like, they are not constrained by, one of the Imagineers said, like, we knew what we wanted to do, but the technology didn't exist. So we had to go create it. Like, so I think what you said about we're sticking in the box, it's scary and it's hard to break out of that. But like, man, what would it be like if we just all sat around and said, what if? Or we focused less on the how and just imagined and dreamed for a little while. And then once we figure out the dream that we want, then we can figure out maybe how we might get there. And it may take little steps and it may be a long journey, but anyway, just an anecdote that came to mind as we were talking about that.
I appreciate it. I think it's really good. And we've watched that show on Disney Plus too, and it's very great. So there's my little plug for that.
Yeah, I was going to say in thinking about asking teens and preteens to participate and be a part of church, just today, actually, I had asked a brother and sister to do a drama for church. And not only did they say yes, which was great, but they came back to me and said, hey, would you mind if we just rewrote this a little bit, rewrote the script? Sure, that's great. They did send it to me to make sure I approved, but they added a rap into it. So, I could see that in my day, when I was a kid, I think there'd be a lot of people that might have been a little worried about there being some rap music happening in the middle of a church service. But, it was wonderful. It was wonderful that they put their stamp on it. They were excited about it. They really made it a really great video that we were able to show for church. And I saw everybody in the congregation on Zoom, just their smiles light up, and they silently clapped in the background there. It was wonderful.
And you never know, maybe someday they'll be interviewed for a podcast, asked about their memories as a youth, and they'll be like, this one time we were able to do a video that had a rap in it.
Exactly.
Because like you said, you got them excited. Like, they were excited about contributing. And I think that that's ultimately the most important thing. So that's awesome. So I feel like I've maybe asked this question a bunch, maybe in different ways, but I'll just say it again. What gives you hope as we move forward together as a church, whether that be your congregation or mission center or just collectively as a church? What do you see hopeful in our uncertain future together?
Well, Community of Christ definitely has a relevant message of hope and peace, acceptance of all different people. And I think the world desperately needs that right now. I think it's also really important and hopeful that to see how during this pandemic we've survived. We've adapted and grown. Many of us have learned how to create online church. In my own congregation, some of the things got easier because we aren't doing worships that are nearly as long. Our sermons are shorter. We don't have to make bulletins. There's some things that are they're faster and easier. But at the same time, we've also had to work harder to connect with each other, especially those people that maybe don't have internet access. So we've been sending cards. Maybe we drop off packages at each other's houses. We created a better calling tree to keep in touch. And those are the kinds of things that really ought to continue even when we go back to meeting in person. So it's made us grow in a new way and explore a new way of doing ministry. Maybe we need to reevaluate the complex things that we do for church, that maybe we can just kind of pull back to the ways to do it easier and not drain our ministers, stress everybody out and exhaust us. instead to make it easier to worship God and to be in community with each other.
Yeah. How do we shift from doing church to being church? I think there's a lot of energy that eventually wears people out of just doing church, all the mechanics and all the administrative stuff that has to happen sometimes to have formal church, when really at the heart of it is, like we said, community. And community can be created in really simple ways, albeit they need to be intentional most of the time. But maybe church can be a game night where you start by saying, hey, how's everybody's week been? And, do you have any things you want us to pray about? But it doesn't have to be maybe as much about doing it, but more about being the church.
I had to laugh when you mentioned bulletins, because I almost forgot about bulletins, formal bulletins that you print off. I don't know a single person in my congregation that likes formatting them and printing them and folding them and doing all the things. Mm-hmm. Why do we do that to ourselves?
Yes.
And for those in my congregation, I'm not necessarily saying that we need to get rid of them post-pandemic, but we have to be honest with ourselves. Nobody likes to do them.
It's a lot of work.
And come on, let's be honest. They're not very eco-friendly either, right? So that creation care thing is big to me. So, I've had that idea for a couple of years now of like, man, wouldn't it be cool if when you walk into the sanctuary, there's a QR code there and you just snap a picture of it with your phone and there's your virtual bulletin for the day. No more paper waste.
Brilliant. Nobody has to deal with which way the paper goes into the printer and how do you do the double side. Clearly I have feelings about this.
Yes.
Well, I have just really enjoyed this conversation a lot, actually. And I always like to end these by just saying, is there anything else that you would like to leave us with? I feel like sometimes we breeze through the conversation and maybe I left something out, or maybe you had other ideas come to you. Is there anything else that you'd like to say?
No, I think we really enjoyed this as well. It was wonderful to talk with you and to be part of Project Zion. Woohoo!
Yeah, nothing else comes to my mind. I think, yeah, it's been fun. I can remember back when we were doing all that young adult stuff in Central Mission Center with John Chatburn and team. We actually started a podcast called Yak. Have you ever heard about Yak?
I have not heard about Yak. Tell me about Yak.
So Yak, YAK, which stood for Young Adult Koinonia. And it was a podcast ministry that we kind of kicked off and started. And we did a little bit, and I don't know if it was too early before podcasts were all the rave. It was early on, but it takes a lot of effort and energy to put these together. So it's cool now to see Project Zion kind of has legs and just the exciting ministry that it's become.
It is fun to be part of, and I'm just one member of a very large team. I think there's 11 of us now that are involved in producing the podcast. So yeah, it takes a village. It takes a village for sure.
So if you ever talk to John Chatburn, ask him about Yak.
I will. He was my mission center president when I joined Community of Christ. So yeah, he and Andy are friends. So that's
we love John and Andy.
That's awesome. I just have to say real quick that I love how small this church is. It's big, but it's also really small, and the degrees of separation, like if somebody knows somebody from, it's nice.
Yes, I agree.
I was telling Megan today, thinking about the fact that we were going to sit down and have a conversation with, Brittany, thinking back to, like you said, 2 years ago at World Conference, like that was the first time we met. And honestly, that's the only time I think we've actually been together in person. So we had the pleasure of having you and your family over to our house for dinner with Gina and Chantal and a few of our friends to just talk about church stuff. And we had a great conversation, but because we had that kind of shared connection of the church, like it was like we were instant friends, and then since then being able to follow each other on social media, it's just like we know each other now. And so it's that's that connection that you get with people in the church. It's like your immediate friends.
There really is an instant understanding, and even shared jokes. Like, remember when you pulled out the old camp the old camp songbook and the song, the reorg, what was it?
Oh, we're all reorgies.
Yes.
I don't know that I could sing all of it right now.
It was Joseph was a prophet, wasn't it?
Yes.
And it specifically mentioned his one wife.
Yes, his one and only wife.
Yes. Oh, we got such a kick out of that. That was great.
There should just be a session like that at the next World Conference, like some little, behind the scenes, underground, like young adult sharing time that was a blast.
It was. Yeah.
It really was. And I agree. I haven't been to very many. I know that there are some young adult activities at World Conference, but again, I mean, I'm a young adult with young children as well, so it makes it a little bit tricky to hit those. But definitely I think that there is such a shared camaraderie and shared story and just shared culture and community that I found that every time that I come across a member of Community of Christ, there's just that thing that connects us that I really, really appreciate. So yeah, well, thank you too. This, like I said, was a great interview. It was a lot of fun. Listeners, hopefully you didn't hear my children. Speaking of young children, hopefully you didn't hear them too much. They're running around. But again, that's part of being a young adult, I guess, in the church. So I'm grateful again to have you two on. And yeah, thanks. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been fun.
Thanks for listening to Project Zion Podcast. Subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcast, Stitcher, or whatever podcast streaming service you use, and while you are there, give us a 5-star rating. Project Zion Podcast is sponsored by Latter-day Seeker Ministries of Community of Christ. The views and opinions expressed in this episode are of those speaking and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Latter-day Seeker Ministries or Community of Christ. The music has been graciously provided by Dave Hines.